You're listening to Contesting Wrestling. Now, that's interesting in and of itself that you're choosing to do that, right? Because that already puts you and I somewhat in opposition. Because you're like, I'm interested enough in wrestling, I'm going to seek out a podcast and listen to it. Whereas I am somebody who thought it would be fun to start a podcast about wrestling as somebody who doesn't like wrestling, and it's sort of like it become like I'm trapped in a Hellraiser puzzle cube of my own suffering now as a result of that. So already I don't understand you. For a long time we were like, maybe this podcast will also appeal to people who aren't sure about wrestling, and they can Evan can be sort of a cathartic my name is Evan Burke. Evan can be sort of a cathartic thing for them, but no, none of them. That's not anybody who listens to us. It's everybody who listens to us loves wrestling. It's most people. The point is, look, thanks for listening. I do appreciate it.
Don't really watch wrestling, but listen to us. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, hi. Okay, all right. Well, yeah, you guys can be diplomatic. That's fine. That's
right.
okay. We can do it.
Well,
but the point
the
point is that these my co-hosts are two of my nearest and dearest friends. Two people whomst I have at minimum 1.5 oceans of respect for. And this whole show has been about me trying to understand them, trying to understand their passion for wrestling. I'm in a tough place with it now. I feel like I've kind of made up my mind in a lot of ways about wrestling. And yet this is the second time in a row since I've come back that I sat down to watch all the stuff and I was feeling crabby and frustrated and not amiable to wrestling as a concept. And I have to give this man credit that his talent and charisma as a performer, I did begrudgingly drag me into a realm of respect.
Well, I'm really glad for that, Evan. And I'm really interested to hear how you reacted to these two matches. I expected you to react better to one than the other for a couple of reasons. And I don't know if we're still really doing this general theme, but I consider one of them a good match and the other one a bad match, despite the fact that most people, we're talking about Bryan Danielson, the American Dragon, and particularly his run in Ring of Honor, most people consider both of these matches among his best. But I have some problems with the second one that we'll get to. First, we should introduce ourselves, Doc and I. We didn't do so in the last episode because, Evan's internal drama was more important. And it was.
It was.
Glad
also,
we can
we've
all
been doing a bunch
recognize
of premium episodes where we don't really introduce ourselves, so we're just out of practice. So my name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in professional wrestling about 13 years now. I've done a little bit of everything. I do wrestling, commentary, ring announcing, a bunch of different stuff backstage, teaching history now. I'm just expanding my scope.
Using your doctorate.
Yes. Well, Professor, introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm Dr. Ben Abelson, professor of philosophy at Mercy College. I'm in a fair amount of pain today, which might make me more cantankerous than normal. I was in a one-on-one roller derby fight on the street yesterday.
Ben got laid.
Well, no,
and it was rough.
These roller derby fights are more common than one might suspect. I lost, but I got her number, so,
That's what they're calling it these days.
We were all winners.
I'm in the normal amount of pain because I'm locked in a one-on-one struggle with life and the pain of living it.
I've trained and done wrestling for years and years, and I can't remember a time that my neck hasn't hurt at least a little. I mean, I remember a time, but it was a long, long time. I can't, pinpoint the time. Yeah.
I did get a pair of roller
Bryan Danielson
skates,
in Ring of Honor,
okay.
yes.
Anyway. Yes.
So Ben and I, when Ben and I started going to Ring of Honor shows, Bryan Danielson was a respected guy on that scene. He had main evented the first Ring of Honor show, and we watched that match, I believe, some time ago. But he had not matured yet.
Yeah, we mentioned on a recent premium, we watched the very first Ring of Honor show that we had attended together, and Danielson was on that show. And he made very little impression on me when we first saw that show because he was in this weird, like, middle state between characters that was not particularly good.
Well, he traveled to all the major kind of wrestling territories at the time around the world because there weren't really territories in America. And he took a little bit from everybody's style, and he was always very good technically. And when he finally started firing on all cylinders, as they say, he came back to America, and he won the Ring of Honor Championship. And he was Ring of Honor champion for, not 2 years, but like a good year and a half straight. And at every show, he had these like long technical classic matches for the serious wrestling fan. But he was so good and so charismatic. He was so charismatic that people thought he wasn't charismatic because he was so good at wrestling. But people who are good at wrestling and uncharismatic don't make it.
Yeah, I do have. Oh, sorry, you go.
I was going to say he knew how to play the character of the great technical wrestler.
Right, instead of just being the guy who knew too many holds.
Now, full disclosure, it's time to disclose something here to you guys and to the listeners, which is, so you'll notice I have a softer opinion on this than I have had in the last few episodes. In part because because the guy's good. The guy's obviously clearly good. Also because I watched these matches at 1.5 speed. I did not skip them. I didn't skip anything. I didn't skip through them, but I did watch them at 1.5 speed and found it
That's better than the
to
alternative.
be a lot more bearable than I have ever found wrestling to be.
Could
and
you
I found
hear
the pace-
everything?
Yeah, you can hear everything. If you watch it on YouTube, they pitch shift it so it still sounds normal. So people just talk.
gotcha.
I mean, it's fast. It is something that I am sure the hardcore wrestling fans are like. I'm like, if I told somebody like you should listen to like this piece of music and they were like, oh, I listen to it at 1.5 speed because it bothers me. That would bother me.
I feel a little
I
weird
respect
about
that.
it. Yeah,
I
yeah.
respect that. It's what I did.
I can totally defend it. I think that it's more akin to saying, hey, read this book or listen to this audiobook. And you're like, okay, so you'll turn up the speed because if you can process it that fast. All the really slow things are kind of subtle notes, once again, for the really hardcore fan who's watched more wrestling than you could possibly imagine. So I can totally understand how you would enjoy matches like this a little bit faster. I don't think you would have missed anything you wouldn't have missed out of inexperience anyway.
And I understand that the pacing and the timing is incredibly poor. It's like watching like a great comedy or something special where like the timing is really important. So I get that, but I had to do what I had to do for myself.
Fair enough.
And I felt good about it. And I still have. I got a lot to say.
The timing matters especially much for the live crowd, right? Like the match at 1.5 speed in front of the live crowd might not have come off the same
I mean,
way.
you just hear a lot like, you got bitch slap. You got bitch slap. You got bitch
the
slap.
crowd is also at one point. It's just an increase in rhythm. It doesn't mean that like anything that it's all context, you know?
Yeah,
you play a song a little faster, it's the same song. It might feel a little faster, but by the end of it, it feels the same.
Did I try it at 2 times speed? Yes, and I was like, this is clearly too much. This I can't understand what they're saying. So I backed off until it was 1.15. So
right.
I feel
So,
like I just need
fair
to be
enough.
honest about that.
So let's set up this particular match then, at whatever speed anyone chooses to watch it. Okay, we as Doc already explained, Bryan Danielson was Ring of Honor champion. At this point, this is this match with Kenta from Glory by Honor 5 Night 2 in 2006. It's September 9th, 2006. So it's just about a week shy of Danielson holding the title for a full year. And he'd beaten everybody. He'd had these classic matches with everybody, including about a month before this, he had two out of 3 falls matches on back-to-back nights, both of which ended up being 1-hour draws, one against Nigel McGuinness and one against Colt Cabana. Now, in the second one against Colt Cabana, he injured himself about 20 minutes into it. He tore something in his shoulder and I think in his pec. And you can watch it when you watch the match, like he's clearly injured. I mean, if he's faking it, he's doing a remarkable job of selling it.
Put a pin in his selling. Well, I want to make a point about that later, but yes.
Okay, yeah. So he finished the fucking 1 hour match with this like horribly destroyed shoulder, apparently. So they announced that he needs surgery and that he might have to drop the title. And we're like, fuck, he's had this beautiful reign. The Ring of Honor title at this point had an unblemished history. Like no one had ever vacated it. It had just been one classic reign after another with maybe a transitional champion in between. You know, you had Loki's initial reign, Samoa Joe's over 2-year reign, then Austin Aries got it, then CM Punk beat Austin Aries when he was already under contract with WWE, and they did this whole storyline where he was threatening to take the title to WWE, and they had to get it off of him before he left Ring of Honor. James Gibson got it, and he was great, and then Danielson beat Gibson. So it was this awesome title legacy at this point. No one wanted to see anyone drop the title without losing it in the ring. And they also didn't want to see the title change hands because someone was injured and not because that was the story. Because the story at the time was Bryan Danielson was a heel. He had betrayed Ring of Honor in their war with CZW. Okay, so he was a massive heel. He, like Kenta, probably should have been the overwhelming babyface in this match, but because everyone knew that Danielson was injured, and we were like, well, we can't have Kenta win the title and bring it to Pro Wrestling Noah, like, you know, and we don't want to end Danielson's reign early just because he's hurt. So he ended up having way more support in that match and actually basically played the babyface. So we didn't know, whereas it was going to be a foregone conclusion probably that he was going to win. Because of the injury, we didn't know. And that really fed a lot into how emotional the crowd response was for this match.
Yeah, I was going to say that he, just in general, I feel like when he sells... So, like, from watching him on the reality show, I think, which is, like, I mean, we'd watched a couple of other of his matches, but, like, I feel like I got to know him the most from watching him on the episode of The Bellas. It does seem like he's good at, like, he's good at performing in the sense where he's just like, okay, the cameras are on, so I'm just going to crank me up a whole bunch. And and in the same sort of way, I feel like when he is selling, when he looks like he's hurt, he does a particularly good job of making it look very naturalistic while also still clearly faking. You know what I mean? Like he's still like, you know, like we're like, like Kenta will do something to him that I know from watching wrestling isn't a thing that like actually really hurts all that much. And he... You know, it doesn't look like he's overselling. It doesn't look comical. It just looks like Kenta does something that I know doesn't really hurt, and it looks like it really hurts. Yeah.
At the same time, he was probably in pain that entire match because his shoulder was actually hurt, and Kenta was kicking him directly in his shoulder a lot.
They seem to also have genuine animosity. I don't know how much that is performance and how much they seem to be a combination of the ROH sportsmanship and also they seem to genuinely not like each other.
Well, they both probably wanted to prove to the fans and to everybody watching that they individually were the best at the time.
And they both have incredible pedigrees. So, like, Danielson was trained by Shawn Michaels and then William Regal a little bit. Kenta was trained by Kenta Kobashi and Mitsuharu Misawa. In a way, at the time, they were both, like, the best product of their respective countries. So there was definitely some genuine competition, some competitive rivalry there. I don't think there was any like real personal animosity between them, but you know, that can also happen during the match. I mean, you know, Danielson really early on hits Kenta with like a brutal knee strike, and Kenta fights back by kicking Danielson right in the shoulder, and they were probably both totally cool with that happening, but still, someone hits you and it hurts, you're going to fire up a little bit at them.
Well, it wakes you up in the ring sometimes. You got to start believing it when you're in there. If you want to really show the people that you believe it. And you can't get too lost in it. But you have to be able to bring it. And sometimes getting hurt a little helps you bring it out. It kicks your instincts in.
Now, before we get deeper into the match, thankfully on YouTube, someone had uploaded Bryan Danielson's entrance for this particular match because the ROH video doesn't have the entrance because of the licensed music. Now, Evan, how did you feel about Bryan Danielson entering to the final countdown?
I mean, yeah, it's great. He clearly is having a great time. The crowd, most wrestler, I will say, you would have to be pretty devoid of charisma to come out to the final countdown and not have it be awesome. You know what I mean? Like, you would have to be, if you were only kind of good at it, but you had that as your music, like, yeah, people would be into it. People would be cheering. It'd be a lot of fun to hear, especially if it's people who are maybe a little younger than us and don't have the immediate association with Arrested Development.
Yeah.
Because for me, I'm just the exact right. I can't ever think of anything but Joe Bluth. But if you didn't watch Arrested Development all the time, yeah.
So I feel like the final countdown just perfectly encapsulates both the attitude of the character of Bryan Danielson and the character of the Ring of Honor crowd. This whole taking something way too seriously in a sense, while knowing that it's comical, and knowing that it really isn't serious, but still taking it as seriously as you possibly can.
I think that's professional wrestling.
It's a big moment. It's a big moment when Kenta introduces disrespect into the main the first time, where he's does a move that's specifically well, fuck you, shit.
He's really good at that. That was a lot of his character, which got over well, especially in Japan, when his idea was I'm a young junior heavyweight. I still think I'm better than all these guys who I'm supposed to worship, and it got over.
I don't think it's necessarily a I don't know. I don't think this is too broad of a generalization, but I think that Japanese culture has a much more nuanced concept of respect and disrespect than we do.
Yeah, I think so.
We kind of have 3 or 4 settings, whereas they've got 10 settings.
Before we get away from Danielson's music, I said one of the problems before he was Ring of Honor champion is he hadn't really found himself yet and all that. Some of the details in his work just weren't there. And one of that was his presentation, which he changed a little bit through his early years. In that match that the professor talked about a little bit earlier that we had watched, that didn't make much of an impression of us. He was facing Homicide, and he was coming out at the time in a giant red velvet cloak with a hood. I think he was trying to think of himself as a wizard or something. He grew a big beard.
Yeah.
And he was still using the same music he had used for a few years, which was Self-Esteem by The Offspring.
First, the Imperial March from Star Wars to start it, into Self-Esteem by The Offspring.
I can't think of a less I'm the best wrestler in the world theme than Self-Esteem by The Offspring. It never fit. It just didn't fit. It was a song that he probably thought was cool when he was a teenager and just kept with it. And either that or he just didn't have the confidence to use the final countdown yet.
Maybe he just really didn't listen to the lyrics, and he was like, I've got a lot of self-esteem. So this is I'm gonna have the song about self-esteem, right? That's it. I paid attention to 0 of the other lyrics.
It's like Born in the USA.
It's
right?
amazing. Every fucking presidential race. It's a really. I think this was the first one where it didn't, unless it happened in the primary at some point. But somebody always fucking plays Born in the USA with, and I'm like, I guess you don't really hear the lyric. When I'm walking around in a supermarket, I don't really pay attention to the lyrics in the verse or anything. I had to go seek it out after seeing somebody tweet that. Anyway.
So on Kenta's disrespect, so he jumped the gun on Danielson, because if you notice in the McGuinness match, which was actually earlier than the Kenta match, we'll talk about more in a little bit. Danielson does the same thing to McGinnis, backs him up into the corner, and then when the referee breaks them apart, he slaps him in the face. That was like Danielson's regular opening for a match, but Kenta gets him first in the Glory by Honor match.
Well, Kenta does his classic move where he gets you down, then goes to the outside, springboards over the top rope, and lands just on his feet, and then lightly kicks you in the face.
Right, there's that
And,
too. I love that.
Yeah, I saw that clip recently on Twitter. A Ring of Honor mainstay, Shane Hagedorn, who was a trainee at the school and was doing prelim matches for them at the time, tweeted it out and said, "As I watched Kenta do this, I realized, I just did this in the dark match, and I realized the guy I stole it from was in the main event. Oops." Everybody stole Kenta's moves, though.
Right.
People like doing that. Bryan Danielson, to this day on TV, does that running knee strike.
Busaiku knee strike.
The Busaiku knee, yeah. And the go to sleep became CM Punk's main finish. And Kenta did all of them first and visibly for them. And a very innovative wrestler. I want to just give him his due there.
They do, at one point, refer to a move as a Mexican surfboard.
The Romero special.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a great spot, too, where Brian kind of fucks it up for a second, and the crowd chants, "You fucked up" at him, and he puts his leg back in. He says, "I fucked up?" Then does the fucking brutal-ass thing where, from the Romero special, he double stomps the person's knees, and he's like, "I don't ever fuck up."
And then the announcer immediately says, "He never screws up."
Yeah.
It's just...
I think that's Dave Prazak. He's always known what to
It's
do.
also great that, like, in an age when everyone in the WWE, every big WWE star was like a tanned, muscle-bound, like, fucking action figure, this pale, like, blindingly pale, hairless, like, relatively skinny man was the hero for Ring of Honor,
Well, he was a very good wrestler. And when they first started flirting with him in the main event in the WWE, he did a promo. I can't remember who he was standing between. He was standing between, like, I want to say Triple H and the Big Show or something. And he comes out and he just says, "Look, people say all kinds of bad things about me. I'm short. I'm not very good looking, apparently." And then he pauses and he goes, "But I'm a very good wrestler, and I'm going to show everybody that that's going to take me to the top." And it did. That was his gimmick from then on in the WWE. In Ring of Honor, you didn't have to spell it out. It was just clear. And that's the difference between kind of a more hardcore, subtle product and the television product for the people that aren't paying attention anyway, that you have to spell it out. And both of those are fine, but I find that interesting because his character in the WWE wasn't that different from his character in Ring of Honor, but the environment was very different.
He did get a little more tan by then.
Well, you have to for the HD lights, or else you just completely glow.
Also, being
And it
pale
doesn't
was
look good.
Sheamus's gimmick by then.
Well, then there's that, yes.
Which, what's the hold where he kind of is like spooning the guy? Where they're on
Talking
kinda
about the
spooning the
cross-faced
guy.
chicken wing?
maybe where they're like on the ground and he's like kind of behind. I don't know. I was trying to imagine which hold he used on the guy who burgled his house that one time.
Oh, yeah, it might very well might have been the cross-faced chicken wing. That's
might
what
have
he
been
won
when
the
I-
Ring of
yes.
Honor title with. Yeah.
When I picture that scene, I'm picturing him in a hold where he's kind of spooning the guy and they're just lying there like very close to each other.
Yeah.
And like maybe like the robber head like has like his like left arm is out a little bit and he's like just trying to like slap at Bryan Danielson. He's like, "Come on, man."
Yeah.
Man,
By
just
the
stop
way-
it."
You don't have the leverage, man. Just wait. The cops are coming.
By the way, I always love
me.
that Danielson really does the cross-faced chicken wing. He hooks it in completely, clasps his hands, not like Asuka with the Asuka lock. And I get it. Most of the women she's putting the Asuka lock on probably aren't flexible enough for her to like really cinch it in.
If you get it all in and clasp your hands, you have that hold on really tight.
Oh yeah, it's painful.
Depending on who
it's
you're doing it to.
legitimately painful.
At one point, once they're in the audience during this
Well,
match.
okay, before we get to them being in the audience, he does that crazy fucking dive into the audience.
Yeah.
Which was always crazy. Like, the Ring of Honor chairs were not like flimsy folding chairs. They were these hard, like, theater chairs that, he just fucking dove into without giving a fuck. Always crazy.
They were probably the ballroom's chairs.
Yeah. Yeah, this was in the grand ballroom of the Manhattan Center.
Somebody
And-
was probably like, my chairs.
Yeah, actually, but that's the thing that a lot of fans don't really think about. You go to a venue, if they provide their own chairs, you got to take care of their chairs. And if you break their chairs, or if your wrestlers just break their chairs, you probably have to pay to replace them.
Yeah, you can't just
Or you
get
have to
chairs.
replace them yourself because they need the chairs by tomorrow when somebody else needs to use them. And you don't think about that as a fan, but that's a real logistical thing if you're dealing with venues. Or you're renting chairs from a place that rents chairs. People need 100 to 500 to 1,000 chairs all the time, and people, especially not in the middle of big cities, they'll rent 1,000 chairs to you. And if they get 997 chairs back, you're in trouble, and you probably owe them a lot.
There's a big. I knew a guy who had a chair rental place. That was a big problem.
That's the single biggest problem you can have, renting a bunch of
He
chairs.
didn't have a lot of other. I'm lying. I made this man up.
I would believe you.
I
If
know.
You didn't, if you didn't
That's
get-
why I felt
It's
bad.
okay.
That's why I admitted to lying because I didn't.
You're not a worker,
I didn't
man.
want to,
That's the
I
thing.
don't like.
You just
Well, I don't
lie.
like deceiving my friends, unlike all wrestlers.
Yeah, well,
So Ring of Honor matches
wanna
were
be
real.
They were
This
real.
is really
Seek a
what made the
deceiver.
difference.
There
As
was a
you just
guy
said.
in the front row. What I was going to say earlier, there was a guy in the front row who has a full Durst, where he has a red backwards baseball cap and just the chin hair, like just the chin patch and nothing else.
that was the style at the time amongst.
No, it wasn't.
some
No,
people.
this was like years after.
yeah,
It was
right.
very
Even
passe.
at the height of Limp Bizkit's popularity and cultural influence, you really
you're
didn't
right.
see that a lot. Like you said,
That's
like
true.
there was more of it at the time, but like
Right.
it's
It would be
not-
more in style today, I think, as I see teenagers and people in their 20s tweeting hey, I like Limp Bizkit. I don't know why everybody hates them. And I'm like, well, there was Fred Durst was a huge star, and then he was an asshole, and none of that is relevant to your experience as a guy who's 22 in the year 2021.
Yeah.
You just heard $3 bill, y'all, and we're like, this is bumping, and that's the beginning and the end of it. But in 2000, what year was this? 2007?
6.
2006, right. Limp Bizkit were the biggest pariahs in rock. They
true.
were on their way down as fast as possible. They were very quickly to be the least cool band in the world. I mean, that's how it goes. That's my aside about Limp Bizkit. And yeah, there was a guy in the full Durst. You notice about the Ring of Honor crowd, and I've pointed this out before, no women at all.
I mean, we'd
Oh.
bring a couple.
We'd bring a couple. Our dear friend Z came to most of these shows with us, and she had a great time.
They were
She could get to
overjoyed.
the bathroom really easily.
Yeah, the bathroom. Yeah, they were overjoyed at there not being a bathroom line at all.
because there was a gigantic line to the men's room, and you'd see the few women that showed up would literally walk past the men's room line, openly pointing and laughing, like, I could pee. And we're like, yeah, I know. Okay.
I distinctly remember I came to an ROH show with you guys around
Yeah.
this time because I was dating a woman who was really into wrestling, and I will never forget sitting there, and she was one of the only women in the audience who was cheering and getting into it, because I looked around and all of the other women in the audience were sitting there with the same look on their face that I had, just like, I can't. Oh, okay, he threw him. Great. Good for him, I guess. Whatever. And I'm just sitting there and meanwhile she was like, yeah. And then I remember, and then Jack Evans jumped on 7 Guys, and I was like, and in many ways this
Yeah.
podcast the seed was planted that night, because I was like, well, I guess I can't say that was not great to see. So
Jack Evans has been on another level for years. Just want to say that.
Yeah, it's certainly a more accessible kind of feat than a lot of what they're doing.
The double, I think it was the double moonsault. I think he did the
Yeah.
double moonsault,
It's
which you never really see.
Yeah, most
Yeah.
people to the non-fan, Kenta having his fisherman suplex blocked, then going back to the injured arm so that he can get a butterfly suplex. Not as impressive to
that's-
most people.
That's a bit inside.
I will say, as much as I could tell that they were both really, they could just, they had all of the hold exchanges and shit, which was very cool, which was really impressive to watch. But my favorite bit was definitely towards the end when they both just traded flying into the other guy's kick. because they each do that once towards the end, it happens back to back towards the end of the match in a way that looks very painful.
What I would expect to be the most impressive thing that they did is, so Danielson's on the top rope and Kenta vaults all the way to the top rope from the ring, where he usually does like a Falcon Arrow from there, but Danielson blocks it and knocks him off the rope. Danielson goes for a crossbody off the top and Kenta just catches him on his shoulders and hits the fucking go to sleep beautifully. Do you remember that moment, Evan?
I think I remember the go to sleeps at the end.
Yeah, he jumps and Kenta catches him. And
Yeah.
Kenta isn't super fucking jacked John Cena who can catch people
Right.
in midair like that. He's tiny little fucking Kenta. And he perfectly catches him. Like 4 out of 5 times anyone tries a spot like that, they fuck it up completely.
They just fall over.
Yeah.
Probably on somebody's head.
And
And
then
that just didn't happen this time.
the fact that after that spot, Danielson got his foot on the ropes and wasn't pinned from the go to sleep, which had never happened before. Everyone else had gone down to the go to sleep.
This is one of many reasons it's fun to watch short guys fight each other. Because
It's harder for them to get to the ropes. So when they get to the ropes, it's a lot more dramatic.
Speaking of ropes and dramatic, I was surprised I had never seen this particular thing before, where it's like getting towards the end and it's getting progressively more climactic, and then there's a 3 count and you think it's over, but then at the end of the 3 count the ref realizes that his foot had been on, so it was like a 3 count that he plausibly fucked up. And
Yeah.
I was
So
just like, that seemed like, it would be cheap if you saw it every night. But I was like, I was actually like, that's a pretty impressive. I don't think I'd ever seen at least that I remembered, somebody like counting 3 and then be like, my bad, I fucked it up.
The timing on something like that has to be impeccable, or else all the heat goes on the ref. And like Todd Sinclair is very good. He knows how to brush his hand against the mat for 3, and then in the same quarter second, point at the ropes and say, no, foot. And as soon as his hand touches, the crowd gets up, and then the wind comes out of their sails, and it feels fair. It feels like the ref saw it before he could stop his hand, as opposed to waiting an extra second. If you wait 1 extra second, it ruins the spot.
One other thing involving the ropes. So Danielson puts Kenta in the figure 4. Because what would be a fucking classic pro wrestling match without the figure 4? Right? And Kenta gets to the ropes, and the ref is counting to 5. And Danielson's like, I can't get out. Like, our legs are tied together. It's not my fault. Like, you have to help me. And so the ref is taking their legs apart, and he doesn't believe Danielson, obviously. But he starts admonishing him, like, hey, I was counting. And so Danielson had gotten this thing over, where every time his opponent got to the ropes and the ref counted till 4, he would then break the hold and say, I've got till 5, referee. This time, he didn't have to say it. He looks at the crowd. He puts his arms up, and the whole crowd goes, he's got till 5. And that's the fucking crazy shit about Bryan Danielson, is he could get anything over. Like little things like that.
He's the one that got the yes chant.
The
over.
yes chant. And he would be...
And then the no chant.
And it's not just that he would get it over. He would notice that the crowd reacted to some little thing that he did. And then he would use that. And it would become one of his catchphrases or one of his gimmicks.
He says something in the next match that I really wish had become one of his catchphrases. Because in the next match we cover, he does at one point say to the crowd, and I quote, I will kill every single one of you.
Yes. He's like, he challenges them to come in the ring and take a shot at him. He's like, I will kill every single one of you.
I was just like,
Kill every single one
you
of you.
don't see that level of direct antagonism very often, where the heel is actually like, I will fight and defeat everyone in this room right now.
He was in England. They inspire that sort of thing.
Well, I was also thinking, I was like, man, if I was a wrestler, if I was going to be a heel, it would be really fun if I could figure out, like, like if there's like a few people in the front row, if I could like figure out like their Twitter handle or something, and then figure out like where they live, because it's incredibly easy to do that. It's disturbing. And then just in the middle of the match be like, I'm going to kill you, Derek Singleton, who lives at 572 Park Street, and then just watch and be like, what the and then just not address it again, and then just like keep wrestling the match. And just
cool.
really antagonize individual people. That would be my
Let the
strategy.
person who is
Probably some
But
liability
the person
issues
whose
there.
information is publicly available, like almost all of ours are and has always been,
Just start
lose their minds wondering how somebody got their easily searchable information.
Just get up in somebody's face and recite their own credit card number to them.
Like while punching the other guy.
Right.
5, 7, 6, 2, 8.
Expiration February 2024.
A thing we're going to have to explain to kids is that you used to just be issued a giant book with everybody's home telephone number in it. And if you didn't want to be in the book, it was a whole process, and most people just didn't care. Because it's like, if just what's my number? Look me up. I'm in the book.
I was thinking
you know?
about that the other day, about how
Yeah.
I think, because I'm watching the fucking Sopranos, which takes place, 20 years
In the
ago
90s.
in another
Yeah.
universe.
Right. Every plot where you can't communicate is gone now.
Right.
You need an excuse.
Nowadays, having someone's number means you can pester them constantly throughout the day, right? You don't have to catch them at home and call them and hope that they pick up the phone.
Well, that's why I like, and that's why everybody,
Right.
phone numbers have just become these graveyards of fucking spam call. Like, I don't like, I get 20 calls a day, and I don't fucking pick any of them up because it's all just like, oh, your vehicle has been impounded. I'm like, I've never driven a car.
I get ones that is like, your social security number has expired because of some what's the exact phrasing, shady activity on your account. Please hold on. And like, oh wait, I'll hit 1 for an operator, and then after 30 seconds you'll hear like like a room someone's in, then some like, hello, can I help you? And I'm like, you called me. And they're like, what? And I'm like, you called me. And they go, then they hang up on me. Because it's unorganized too. And I get that and I don't feel, I feel bad for the guy who's just on the other end of the line, whose job it is to bother people all day, because I've had jobs
And
like
yet
that.
they
It
still
sucks.
get old people's money.
All I'm
despite it
trying to
being that
do is get
disorganized.
to like the do not call list request. If I can do that, you get slightly less of them. But a lot of people are instructed to hang up before you can ask.
Makes sense.
Anyway,
Okay,
that's my
so
little rant
before we
about
get
that.
full on into the Nigel McGuinness match, I'm gonna geek out over the finishing sequence to this Danielson Kenta match because it is fucking awesome. The crowd goes nuts for every single near fall. So Kenta goes for the go to sleep again. Danielson reverses it into a crucifix and then reverses that and then transitions from that into the MMA elbows, where he starts elbowing him in the head over and over again, which was something that Danielson had got over. He had finished matches with it. He finishes the McGuinness match with it. Which was cool because there was an MMA influence in this match that was not prevalent in wrestling yet at the time, but now very much is. So then Kenta fights up out of the elbows. It looks like he's about to pass out, but he's like, no, fighting spirit, stands up as if he's going to go back into a go to sleep. But then Danielson drops behind him, puts on the cattle mutilation. Kenta reverses that into a very, very close 2 count. But Danielson gets out of that. Kenta's he goes into a tiger suplex and then back into the cattle mutilation. Kenta is starting to drag himself towards the ropes. Danielson realizes that, lets go of the cattle mutilation, goes back into the elbows, and then finally back into the cattle mutilation. Kenta can't fight out anymore, and he taps. And we all went fucking bananas.
Something about the elbows that he throws versus punching. So I feel like punching is almost always bad in wrestling.
Yes.
right? It really like
Very few people can do it well.
without the addition of like movie magic, like it's really hard to fake punch somebody. And right, and then if you're actually punching the guy, like that's not good. You don't want to be doing that. And the elbows, the way that he throws it's really great because obviously it's not really hurting anybody, but it looks so much better than every wrestling fight. Like his specific like on top elbows where he's like hitting you with like the meat of his bicep, kind of, because like it look, especially like if you are in the audience, like that absolutely looks like you're just nailing somebody with your fucking, I don't know. And I just appreciated
Absolutely.
that. Oh yeah, something that I'm figuring out as we're doing this is that he doesn't do any of the things that piss me off about wrestling.
Yes.
Like I had to give him that, where it's like as I'm watching it, I'm just like, okay, well yeah, that looks good, and that this is pretty compelling, and this is I'm like, yeah, and I
This shit
wasn't
makes
upset
sense.
at the end.
Yeah, he eschewed a lot of, wrestling tropes that were outdated, and like I talked about the MMA influence. He and other guys like Zack Sabre Jr., you see very few like Irish whips, very few like, I'm going to throw you off the ropes and you're going to bounce and keep running. And then we're going to do a whole bunch of different stunts where we're both still running the whole time. Like,
Right.
he doesn't do a lot of that. Because it fucking looks fake, it looks stupid. I sometimes I still like it, but he pioneered this more realistic style, and everyone who was influenced by him definitely pushed the artistic style of wrestling forward. One other thing I wanted to say about strikes, like those MMA elbows, that's a finisher, but usually strikes, and especially punches in traditional wrestling, they're there for rhythm, right? They're not actually, which is kind of stupid because you're punching someone in the face, and that should have some kind of impact on them. But largely in wrestling, they're to set the pace of what's about to happen. You throw a few punches, and that sets the pace for the next move, which is kind of the end of that sentence. And things like that. So, when you watch wrestling as a fan, and for me, I watch it and I take it in almost more like music than like theater, where it has that kind of rhythm and punctuation, and the highs and lows are very much like, you would, and there's almost like key changes sometimes when, you move from, a more technical kind of match into a more, high impact portion of the match, things like that. I wanted to mention also earlier, when Danielson did that dive into the crowd, that's when, it doesn't so much happen in this match, but whenever he would do that, the crowd that's when they would chant "Best in the World." Because he showed, like, most of his match was grappling. But he's like, yeah, I can also do an incredibly risky high-flying move. It's like, oh, yes, you are actually the best in the world. You can do anything.
A well-done punch in wrestling can be a thing of beauty, and very few people can do it right. There's a match in Kurt Angle always knew how to throw a good punch, and one of the things that he knew when and where to use it as a guy whose gimmick was primarily just grappling. He had a match at WrestleMania with Chris Benoit, and they were wrestling on the mat. They were doing suplexes and toe holds and go behinds. And the story of the match was that Angle was starting to get one-upped by Benoit, which he didn't like because he's the Olympic gold medalist. And like 7 minutes into the match, he throws a punch, and Benoit sells it like he just got punched in the face. And from then on, the match was a brawl because Angle wasn't going to be able to beat him. And like that psychology, I think people understand. Even if they don't consciously understand it, they'll see that and be like, oh, now they're really fighting,
All right, speaking of really fighting, or really doing damage, if not really fighting. So the second match we watched was the title unification match between the Ring of Honor World Championship and the Ring of Honor Pure Championship from ROH Unified on August 12th, 2006, so about a month before the Kenta match. In England, it was the ROH's debut in England. Danielson had been having this incredible world title run. Simultaneously, McGuinness had been having this incredible pure title run. And eventually we will do an episode on McGuinness and his pure title run, because it by itself is amazing and he doesn't really get the credit he deserves.
It was the peak of his career,
but
kind of unfortunately.
Yeah, so, and I think they decided, like, all right, Nigel as pure champion has kind of run its course. We want him to be the world champion soon. And no one is going to be good enough at doing the pure title thing to be his successor. So we're going to have to take the title. We're going to have to get rid of the pure title. And that's basically what they did through the unification match. But this match was held under pure title rules. So let me explain that quickly. Evan, did you understand the pure title rules from how they explained it at the beginning
I
of the
understood
match?
that if they did too many rope escapes, the match would restart.
No. Okay.
Okay.
So
I did
you-
not
so you
understand
didn't
it.
get Because it plays into the finish. And all right. So
And I want to point
well,
out, this isn't because I was watching it at 1.5 speed. It's because I
No.
didn't care enough to really pay attention.
fair enough. And it
Also,
was
it didn't sound good when the ring announcer was talking. It was all echoey and booming. And like the big critique of the pure title was that they had a bunch of extra rules. It made sense when they established it, and to me, it made sense that they cut it out after just a few years. Its point had been
It
made.
made perfect sense to me. It wasn't too complicated. Fucking idiots. Anyway, so
But I really,
That's at Scribe Ben, ladies and
I mean,
gentlemen, on Twitter.
it just seems weird to make a really complicated thing for a big room full of dum-dums. I mean, that's just like, it seems like that would really,
but we were the smart dum-dums.
so it's just dumbs, I guess.
Yeah, the
You-
smart dum-dums, especially at this place in England. They were hanging on to the rules pretty carefully, I think.
You got bitch slapped sounds way better in a Northern English accent
It's
than
true.
it does in
It
America.
does.
Yeah, they're in Liverpool. Okay, so here are the pure title rules. So you each got 3 rope breaks to escape a pin or submission. After you used your 3 rope breaks, you could no longer use the ropes to escape a pin or submission. On the other hand, the opponent could use the ropes to their advantage, which is usually illegal. Like, they could get extra leverage on the ropes if you had used up all your rope breaks. If you used a closed fist, you got a warning the first time. The second time, you were penalized a rope break. If you had no rope breaks, you would be disqualified. The title could change hands on a countout or a disqualification. And unlike most Ring of Honor matches at the time where there were no countouts, there was a 20 count on the floor. Those were the pure title rules.
Now, they explained some extra ones for the unification match, that in the event of a double pin, or if both guys were out and had to be counted to 10 or whatever, they would restart the match. There was going to be, beyond the shadow of a doubt, a winner to this match. They wanted to, because that had happened before where there were really heavily anticipated matches in wrestling history, and like both guys lay with an arm over each other and they both get pinned and then nothing happens. They wanted to assure the crowd that was not what they were planning. They were actually
Especially-
going to get a match with a winner.
I think Nigel was a heel. Well, Nigel was a heel for most of his pure title run. And I think he actually kept the title through a couple of those no decisions.
Yeah. But this was different.
Right, but at this point, he's the huge hero, hometown hero. And Danielson is a complete heel in this match. And it's very cool to see him as a heel here.
I feel like when of the matches we have watched of his, I kind of like it the most when he is a heel. Like, I think of the him and Kofi Kingston match.
Definitely.
I just feel like he seems to understand it better, because one thing I very much have to credit him with is that he has like like a martial arts ish vibe in some ways, in that he seems to have true control over his body.
Yeah.
Like, he really can just everything he does, he executes really well, which is why it seems so, like, I want to, like, almost pedantic when he does, like, those little finger holds and, like, the little wrist bend and stuff like that, where it seems like it's like a pedantic nerd being like, well, technically this is also a way to win, so you can't complain if I do it. And like,
It's also like, I correct me if I'm wrong, Doc, but in wrestling, usually if someone fucks with your fingers, like that's not cool, right? Like you manipulate the wrist, but
manipulate the wrist and the ankle, but the little digits, like, you can really easily mess up somebody's fingers.
but if you're Bryan Danielson or like Pete Dunne, you are good enough and respected enough that people will let you fuck around with their fingers in a match.
And he, there's where? Hold on, I was going somewhere with that. No, never mind. Oh, although he does again. I know I asked this in some episode, but he does the European uppercut. And is the difference is it just in metric? Like the distance is measured in metric.
You don't hit with your fist.
Right.
You hit with your arm. You hit with your forearm.
right,
That way
right.
it's not illegal in pro wrestling. And the reason why it's European is that, in British Lancashire style, which we've never really watched, the rules were a lot more rigidly enforced. And one of the rules was definitely, no closed fists at all. You could actually get like a red card like you would in soccer and get disqualified for stuff like that.
Speaking of British Lancashire style, Evan, I think this was really kind of your first taste of the British technical style that Nigel does.
I guess he did seem noteworthy. I did notice that he was good. I liked this. I mean, compared to, I could tell that the other one was, I guess, technically better. But I would say I actually pound for pound enjoyed this one more.
There's
that's fair.
there's only one reason why I dislike this match, and it comes towards the end of it. So
yeah, it's not all of the excellent technical wrestling
Yeah.
that the two of them always did when they got
They
into
do-
the ring each other. Their styles complemented each other. They were similar, but they weren't that
the
different.
rope breaks are all interesting. Yeah.
A spectacular moment of, I guess one of the things that Danielson is doing heelishly to bother the crowd is he does the cattle mutilation too much. He just does it like I noticed when
Yeah, he
he's
just
in
keeps
heel
doing
mode.
it.
That's another thing he'll do. He'll just keep doing the same shit over. So like people are
Right.
So
right.
when McGinnis does it, the move on him, it's always great when you do somebody's signature move on them. But this had particular resonance of just like, stop it, stop
Yeah.
doing that. How do you like
Totally.
it?
And that's when
No,
he's
totally.
like,
It worked.
he's down 2 rope breaks too. So he's like, well, how the fuck am I going to come back from this? Oh, I'll put him in his own hold. And Nigel kind of like seems to do the move better too, because he's a little bit more muscular and can kind of get more torque on his arms. All right. But here's the thing. So the problem with this match is the excess of the ROH style is very well illustrated here, because they fucking didn't give a fuck about their bodies. They were just so hyped up and going so fucking ham that they get to the point in the match where Danielson has McGinnis on the other side of the ring post, on the outside of the ring, and he takes his 2 hands and with no fucking protection whatsoever just starts slamming Nigel's forehead into the post until he busts him open for real. And the announcer's like, oh, he's got to have a concussion. Yes, he had a fucking
As
concussion.
it turns out,
As it turns out, both of them at one point in their career, Nigel for good and Danielson for a long time, had to quit wrestling because of too many fucking concussions.
You know who else gets a fucking concussion in this match? Towards the end, when Danielson like basically kicks Nigel McGinnis like over the guardrail into the McGinnis goes over, and you can see just for a second he kicks a guy in the audience like down. Like there's no way, like you
Yeah.
don't really see the full aftermath of the move, but like if you go back and watch it, and so this is at this point I slowed it down actually, and I watched this at normal speed, which now has become to me like slow mo. Because I've adjusted to this new life.
Right.
But it looks like he takes a person down in a way that would hurt a lot. Which I'm guessing if you're in Northern England and you go to a fucking wrestling match, it's a given that it might happen. But I've seen collateral damage in wrestling matches before, but this is one of the first times where I've been like, oh, I hope that fucking rando is okay.
It is really a great testament to the passion of pro wrestling fans, how in like, I guess it's less so in England, but even here, like in such a litigious society as our own, that there aren't more lawsuits from people getting hurt at indie shows, because sure, it happens all the fucking time. Doc, remember when we were sitting front row at Ring of Honor, and Dunn and Marcos, or the Carnage Crew, whichever, set up the ladder between the apron and the guardrail with your head in between the legs of the ladder, and then they fucking did a spot and landed on the ladder, and it's like cracked in half, and the legs went flying up, and very easily could have fucking ripped your face off. Like that time with Joey Mercury.
It didn't, luckily, but that's pretty reckless, you know, and it had already started to get more safe at that point, because they really, like, if you went to a wrestling show, it was like, well, you know, stuff. It's like if you go to a hockey game, you're absolving the NHL of any responsibility if a puck goes flying into the crowd and takes your face off, because, you know, it's probably not gonna happen, but it might happen.
You got to be careful. People could die. That's what happened to Gallagher. Yeah. That's why he declined in popularity.
Well, he died?
No,
I killed someone.
No, he hit one of those watermelons, and the rind just fucking sank into the 9-year-old kid's neck. I'm lying again.
Ooh.
I'm sorry.
See, I thought you meant something went flying at him on stage. I don't know.
He lost cultural relevance and then was super racist in his later act, and it
Who
fell
were the
apart.
fucking tiger guys, and the one guy got eaten by the tiger?
Siegfried and Roy. The other guy just died. Siegfried just died.
Oh shit!
Like recently. Yeah.
Yeah, just recently. They were quite old.
Yes.
They were older than I thought they were.
They were exploiting that poor animal.
Well, yes, of course.
But okay, so speaking of, all right, so fucking after these post shots, then they just start headbutting each other for real, over and over again.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure they had already read Christopher Nowinski's book about post-concussion syndrome by this point.
It took a long time for it to really sink in.
It took us so long. It took us so long as a society to be like, all right, okay, I guess we should stop slamming our heads into things as hard as they possibly can, be they fists or because even that's why boxing fell out of favor in the early 20th century. Boxing was the most popular sport, and then eventually people were like, you know what? There's some evidence to suggest getting punched in the face all the time is bad for you, and people were like, oh, I actually don't want my children to do this. Now I guess that's how society should. And then it just took us another fucking like 80 years to be like, oh, I guess also in non-boxing contexts, it's also like, you know how it's bad for a fist to hit you in the face a whole bunch. It turns out it's also bad for any other part of the human body to do that, or
a
objects.
steel chair.
Yeah,
or
yeah. It turns out that's
yes.
those are also just those are just other kinds of fists at the end of the day.
Those are all other kinds of fists. Okay. That's great.
So I see this match as like them fucking going a little too far. And there were really negative consequences coming out of that.
People noticed. People noticed that maybe this was too much, which wasn't something Ring of Honor fans said very often. Like, the match is considered a classic, and I mean, it's a great wrestling match and all, but man, Nigel McGuinness never became a huge star because of his various injuries. And like they say today when they talk to him, like, he's in good shape. He could come back if he wanted to, but he's left the dream. He does commentary. Clearly his body isn't this anymore. He's not training like an athlete. Like, it's over. And it's a shame because he really was one of the best for a long time, for most of his career past a certain point. But it's, too many blows to the head.
We really respected Danielson for toughing it out and wrestling with a torn up shoulder, Right. And the crazy thing about it is he wins that match with Kenta and continues to be champion for another 3 months until he finally loses it to Homicide. And, that shoulder injury, that might have been the same kind of shoulder injury that eventually made him have to drop the WWE World title years later. I don't remember him ever taking time off to get surgery.
No, but I remember when it was finally time for him to stop wrestling, it was like, well, his shoulder has been messed up forever and has just gotten more messed up as time goes on.
But it's like, all right, they're willing to fucking sacrifice their bodies to for the glory of it all and whatever. But at a certain point when it, the fucking concussion shit, it's just too much. It's really not worth it.
because it like it's still, I still find it very disturbing. Like, even if the only problem was his shoulder, right? That still, like, disturbs me. Like, I understand that you know, there's a price for everything, and I'm not saying that, like, he shouldn't do it or that, but it's still just like,
That's a different debate.
It's still, it is at the core of a lot of why I have a hard time with wrestling, is because I just know there, you know, the sacrifice that it demands, and I just don't know how worthy that sacrifice is a lot of time. But then there's also, like, to then throw in, like, at least if a guy fucks up his shoulder and he, like, made a decision to do that, like, it's not good, but, like, the concussion, like,
He
that
can still
will
live his life. He can still
exactly.
live a normal
Like,
life.
Right.
like, enough
Yeah.
concussions, like, the best case scenario is still terrible, is still absolutely terrible. Like, and he, you know, he's a relatively young guy still, and, like, you know, and otherwise takes incredibly good care of himself and isn't wrestling anymore. But man, like, once he's into his 50s or some shit, like, after all those fucking concussions, man. I mean, like, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that that's not the case. But, like, you know, it's so bad.
So some people are just okay. Others are 100% not. They're still actively studying it a lot. You know, that's a big positive of the fact that, we finally started taking it seriously, is that we're actually finally starting to research it a lot, which means we're also researching how to reverse some of the effects. You know, and a lot of it's kind of experimental. When Danielson had to leave for a few years because of concussion issues, it took him a lot to convince the WWE that he was okay to return. He had to get, like, I can't remember the number. He had to get, like, dozens of respected doctors to submit their findings to the head doctor of the wellness program, the WWE, to say, no, he's actually gotten better. We know it's experimental, but here's what his brain looks like now. Here's what it did look like. Here's the improvement because of these therapies. And eventually they're like, okay, you're good to go. Now he's good to go.
Think about that, Evan. Think about how much this man loves wrestling. The WWE refused to let him wrestle. They were like, no, it's too much. Whether they thought it was too much of a liability,
And they wouldn't
or
release
they
him from his
genuinely
contract.
cared about him. Right. They wouldn't be like, we're not just going to let you go to New Japan to continue to get concussed there. And, like,
Because if his contract expired, he just would have wrestled somewhere
It
else
is
who didn't care.
It's ironic. It's a rare example of the WWE being like, no, for the love of God, your health is more important than wrestling. Like,
Yeah, they had to do the same thing with Kurt Angle.
and Yokozuna.
Yeah.
and like,
So
wow,
they, you know,
the way
they don't
Yokozuna.
want that. They don't want that on their fucking, not on their conscience. They don't give a fuck about that. But, you know, they don't want that as part of their, you know, public image, as much as they can avoid it.
Oh, yeah. People dying.
But
Doesn't
yeah,
look
but
good.
Danielson was like, no, I will, like, my brain has healed. and he got dozens of doctors to say that his brain has healed. I'm going to go
it
keep
wasn't
wrestling.
just like his one quack. Like, he had to go above and beyond to prove it.
It would have been like if Yokozuna had, like, slimmed down to 225 and just and just came back and was like, all right, I did something you know, because it seems like Danielson, it seems like he is addicted to wrestling in a way, like you know, anybody who is successful, I'm sure, has to be to some degree, right? Like,
It's
you don't
fun-
get to that level, but he, like, between, like, the technical ability and, like, the you know, you see it when he's in heel mode. I feel like his relentless surgical, like, deconstruction of what it is to do a wrestling match, and the way he puts it back to it, like, it's impressive. You can feel the years of obsession there,
and the relationship with the audience, you know, that is a genuine, palpable connection, and the subtlety of it, and, you know, how he was able to have that subtle connection with the ROH audience, and then, as we'll talk about in the next episode, like, transition that to a connection with a mass audience. You know, it's like he's a master psychologist. You know?
It was a true moment of, like, subtlety and nuance when he screamed, "I'll kill every single one of you."
It's true. It's true.
Kind of is, you know?
Like, just the exact right tone of it, and knowing how the audience would respond to it. that they would
to
boo,
your point.
but that they fucking love it. You know.
You know, to your point about his wrestling being like this deconstruction of what wrestling is, that's why we got so excited when we found out that he was finally going to get his match with Brock Lesnar, because he had said for years he wanted to have his match with Brock Lesnar. And when we finally saw it, it's like that's what Bryan Danielson would do with Brock Lesnar. And we watched it on this podcast. It's a remarkable piece of business. It takes you up, it takes you down, then it takes you up.
And you remember that
yeah.
pretty well, right?
I
Evan?
do actually. I do.
Yeah.
Did
And does it
not
make a
have-
little more sense
Yes.
in context?
Absolutely.
With having watched this match?
Absolutely makes more sense. Yeah, I feel like I did
Mm-hmm.
not have, even though you explained what was going on to me at the time, I feel like
That's
having it
different, yeah.
more in the context of his character. I get
There's
it,
a
man. You
couple
know,
of
I
ma-
wanted to come to this more hostile, right? I feel like we have been.
Yes,
I
getting
feel
you
like
back.
lately it's been like it's been good when there's been more contention and genuine contesting. And I got to fucking give it to I have to give it up to two things, to Bryan Danielson and to the fine people at YouTube that allow me to watch videos at 1.5 speed without it being pitch shifted up so it sounds like a bunch of cartoons.
That might really help actually. That might save the podcast.
That might have saved this podcast.
When we're done with Danielson, let's pick something more contentious.
All right. Yeah,
do
sure.
next.
Goldust. No,
Yeah.
but I've been I've been sort of keeping a catalog in my head of matches that we might revisit, like for the season 2 revisiting, like we did for the first
do
2
that from time to
episodes.
time.
And
Yeah.
I think maybe the Danielson Lesnar match and maybe the Angle Guerrero match might be good things to
Sure.
revisit one day.
All right, well, let's check that out. So before we wrap up, we watched one more silly
Yes.
little thing.
Right. I wanted
from
you to see a
PWG.
little bit more of the Danielson's lighthearted side.
The softer side of Bryan
And
Danielson.
this is a promo from Pro Wrestling Guerrilla featuring Paul London, who I don't think you've really seen before, Evan.
I'd heard the
but
name.
who I think you would like. I think you might like him. Paul London and Bryan Danielson, they were going to team up, and everyone in PWG when they form tag teams come up with silly tag team names. But I think they came up with this one on the spot. I'm pretty sure Paul London was high, and Danielson is just a goofy dude. I'm pretty sure he wasn't high.
I assume Danielson. He seems like a guy who is maybe a real "my body is a temple," like has never maybe
Yeah.
smoked weed when he was
Yeah,
a teenager
yeah.
or something, and then decided. To
Like, I
stop,
wouldn't
like,
be surprised if he's the kind of guy who might have a glass of champagne at the wedding and that's it.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah,
I mean?
like I don't think
But-
he's straight edge.
which is
But-
funny
yeah, right.
because the way. Because even though London is obviously high, I was like trying to, because Danielson is losing it in a way that a high person does lose it, where he's just trying so hard not to laugh, and then he does laugh, and then you can tell on his face he's like, this is so unprofessional that I'm just fucking cracking up while Paul London's
well,
just making
they're
shit up.
talking about he's like, oh, we're a
It's
pod
just
of
fine.
dolphins, but we're also gonna sting you like bees, and this is known. They became known as the hybrid dolphins.
Yeah. Good times. The hybrid dolphins, right? Like this promo made its rounds on the internet pretty quickly just for how goofy it is. And because Danielson's cracking up, and you don't usually see Danielson cracking up, but London was there.
It really
and he knew how
indicates
to do that.
It really indicates the difference in tone between ROH and PWG too.
Yeah, and most other wrestling, really. But right, no, that was the big New York, Philadelphia, Boston indie, and like the big LA indie. That's the difference there.
Yeah,
And that's proper. It's 3,000 miles. You'd figure a culture would be a little different.
And it is. Yeah, it does seem more. I mean, we watched we did the one PWG episode. I'd love to see more PWG
Yeah.
stuff because it does seem to be fun in a way. Like
Yeah.
LA and the East Coast can both be overly serious and take themselves too seriously in differing ways. And yeah, where like the East Coast, it can be a very like no fun kind of thing, whereas on the West Coast, it can
Right.
be like really any level of taking yourself seriously. When this is obviously a ridiculous shit show you people have going over here. But that was this seems to be more like the fun, chaotic side of Los Angeles, where it's like we just got really high and we're forming a wrestling tag team.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, 100%.
So,
So I don't know. Look that up if you haven't seen it. We can't talk too much about it. It's a promo. It's silly.
I'm
you
trying
know?
to, because we have between the premiums and the next and another main episode we'll do eventually. We've got a lot more Danielson to get through. I'm gonna try to interject as much like funny Danielson stuff as possible because he's really fucking good at it.
He is.
Unexpectedly in some ways, when you see the main thing that he does.
He's just he's good at that. Like he's very understated. It's very dry. He kind of has the like I said, like he's got a bit of a like I'm on a mountain, I'm a kung fu master kind of vibe, and there's always
That's kind of his vibe.
and there's
He's minimalist.
yeah, exactly, and there's always those guys can be pretty funny because it's really just a matter of some well placed witticism that goes maybe against their character or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Now, on something that you brought up that I'd like to mention before we finish, we're going to do a premium episode on this. We're still doing premium episodes on our Patreon every single week, even though we've cut the main feed episodes down to once every 2 weeks, just as a way to manage the load. We've done a whole lot. And if you'd like to hear those, you go to patreon.com/contestingwrestling. You can help us out for $1 a month, but if you'd like the premium episodes, our $5 a month tier will get you access to every one we've ever done, plus all the ones going forward once a week. I believe we are putting out just premium episode 67 or 68.
68 just came out. The next one.
68 just came out.
The next
right.
one is 69.
Nice.
What are we going to
And
do
what
for
would be
that?
super nice is that if you want to hear it, come subscribe to our Patreon. We put as much effort into those episodes as we do into these ones. And I feel like we sell it short a little bit, and I want to stop doing that. I'm a shameless shill for a couple of minutes, and then I'll go back to being normal. And that's what I got to say about that. All right, so do we have any parting words before we start wrapping up?
No, I guess fuck you guys for picking up something that I kind of liked, and then sorry, I'm laughing at what's happening in Doc's house right now. No, don't worry about it. And like, look, it's easy for me to shit on wrestling, but this week I watched a 4.5-hour YouTube video that purported to explain Twin Peaks. So who am I to judge anybody?
4.5 hours?
Yeah, with a guy who made a lot of salient points, but also has an annoying tone of voice. I was doing other shit. It's not like I just sat there and watched the video. That's the thing. Wrestling, it's hard to do other shit while you're watching it. I guess you
That's
guys
true.
do it all the time.
Yeah.
It depends, but
Like
yeah.
this, I was like doing the
if
dishes.
you want to
and-
analyze it, then yes,
But the point stands is that we all have our the ways in which we're wasting the precious moments of our lives, and I begrudgingly have to admit that watching Daniel Bryan's wrestling is not amongst the worst ways to do that. So
All
there's
right.
that.
High praise from Evan Burke.
Stay
right.
tuned for round 2 of this, where we'll get into more stuff. This has been Contesting Wrestling. We love you.
Peace.